Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Martha Zoller. She's a political commentator and former aide to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and Senator David Perdue. Martha, thank you so much for joining me.
It is great to be here.
It is great to have you, especially this close to Election Day. As we sit here right now, we are 14 days away, and the race, as we know, is all coming down to those 7 battleground states, one of them being Georgia. A new AJC University of Georgia poll shows former President Donald Trump ahead of Vice President Kamala Harris by 4 points 2 weeks from Election Day. So you hear that number, what do you think?
Well, it's expected, really, that we're in this situation where people have been hearing the messages. We certainly had a very interesting thing happen the end of July where we got this new candidate. You know, supposedly Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, but the Democrats pushed out their candidate that had 14 million votes and put somebody else in there. So for about 2 months, I would say she had this honeymoon where she got no negative press coverage. She was out there. She was very on message, and you saw the numbers really tighten up. In fact, there were a couple of polls that had Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump in Georgia. But I got to tell you, our governor is committed to showing Georgia is not a purple state. He is going to say it is a red state, and he is putting all of his resources behind that, not only to win the presidency, to maybe pick up a seat in the Congress in Georgia, but also to win more seats in the Georgia legislature. So we've got a lot of people working for the same goal. So when I look at that poll, it's not surprising when you dig down into the crosstabs and you see that there are some very key Democratic groups that Kamala Harris has not won over. And it really goes to what you're seeing on the ground right now. And that is Donald Trump is spending time with groups of people that aren't necessarily core voters. He's going to barbershops, he's going to McDonald's, he's going to other places. And then you are seeing her going to her core voters. So she is still shoring up her base, and he is going out and looking for other voters.
You mentioned Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, and as we know, him and Donald Trump had a contentious relationship, to say the least, after the 2020 election. Do you think we're seeing Donald Trump pull ahead in Georgia because Governor Kemp endorsed him, because he was shown with him during the hurricane?
Yeah, and part of it, too, is that Brian Kemp kept the high road the entire time. I mean, he didn't go in and start name calling until his wife got drawn into it. And then he made a little statement, don't bring my family into it. But other than that, I think what happened is that Donald Trump saw that he needed Brian Kemp, and Brian Kemp had done a good job. So they needed that. And also Kemp actually did better in 2022 without the Trump endorsement than he did with the Trump endorsement in 2018. So yes, they have a tenuous relationship, but they're all rowing in the same direction right now. So it's all good.
From what you're saying Georgia is no longer a purple state. Georgia is a red state. But as we know, Biden won Georgia in 2020 by less than 12,000 votes. And this poll in September showed Trump and Harris essentially tied. So why do you think Trump was able to pull away? Because now 2 weeks out, he's 4 points ahead, which is slightly above the margin of error.
Yeah, I think it's because you're seeing a different kind of Donald Trump right now. I mean, look, Donald Trump's always going to be Donald Trump. He's going to say things, he's going to do things that aren't necessarily along with the mainstream. But that's what people like about him, I think. And I think what you're starting to see is working class folks coming behind him, and this realigning of the parties is happening a little more quickly. The richest zip codes in America are now Democratic, and working class folks around the country are becoming more and more Republican. And they can make fun of us and say we're not well educated. They can make fun of us and talk about us in a lot of different ways. And Kamala Harris almost did it. You know, she almost had her deplorable moment yesterday where she said, you know, Trump and his followers are the wrong kind of people for America. And then she caught herself and said, I don't mean his voters, I mean his followers. So I think that it's an interesting time, and that people are saying, are you better than you were 4 years ago? And also, if you want to turn the page from what? So I think the messages that the Harris campaign is putting out are not resonating. And Trump is talking about what people really care about. And the Harris campaign is hoping that people really care about abortion rights, because that's really what they're hanging their hat on right now.
I am from one of the other battleground states in this election that everyone has their eyes on. I'm from Pennsylvania. So
Ah,
I feel, yes. So when people talk about Pennsylvania voters, I can tell what the national media might be missing from that conversation because I'm born there. I'm raised there. I went to school there. I have family there. I'm talking to those voters every day. You probably feel the same way about Georgia because you're a political commentator there. You know the political landscape there. What do you think the national media is missing when it comes to Georgia voters?
that that so-called uneducated voter is a salt of the earth kind of person that's just trying to support their family, and that the issues around that being able to support their family is very important. These suburban women voters that we all talk about, I like to call them squishy Republican women, okay? Because they have been going back and forth for 25 years. They voted for Clinton in his second term. They voted for Obama in his second term. They voted for Trump, then they voted for Biden. And I think they're going back to Trump because it's about their family. It's about what schools their kids go to. It's about safety. It's about inflation. It's about immigration. 40 miles down the road from where I live is where Laken Riley went to college. And Laken Riley was killed by an illegal immigrant that should not have been in this country. And for me, I think this immigration issue is much bigger because of the kind of fear that people have. And I don't think it's unfounded fear because we're seeing a real increase in these kinds of crimes.
Laken Riley was a real flashpoint in the conversation when it comes to immigration in this country. Do you think that immigration is on the same caliber of the economy when it comes to Georgia voters?
I think it's one and two, and it may go back and forth depending on who you talk to. I mean, I saw a report yesterday about the number of young, underage people that are missing. They got put in places and now they can't find them. And there was a investigator that was just in tears because she uncovered a ring of human traffickers, which is really 21st century slavery. Human traffickers that have these click-on apps where it's like ordering a girl like you're ordering pizza. And it is just really, it's 21st century slavery, and we ought to be up in arms about it. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you should be against 2.8 million people coming into this country that are undocumented, because the United States of America immigrates legally every year 1.1 million people. That is more than the rest of the world combined. By anybody's definition, we are not anti-immigrant if you follow the law. What's happening now is we're not following the law, and we're seeing it in small towns in Georgia. We're seeing it in towns not only in Texas, but in Pennsylvania and in New York and in Michigan and anywhere in Virginia. You can name the state, you are seeing these problems that are coming around. I think these folks are being used, if you want to know the truth, and I'm opposed to that.
I do want to get back to the poll and the demographics here and talk about what you described as those squishy Republican women, because when you break down the demographics from this poll, you see that 59% of men in Georgia support Trump, 55% of women voters will cast a vote for Harris. When it comes to undecideds, 11% of men don't have their minds made up, compared to 6% of female voters in Georgia who have the same, or who are in the same boat. So in the home stretch here, what do you think Republicans can do in Georgia to court the female vote?
Well, I think that if people say they're undecided at this point in time, they are probably not going to vote. I'd be willing to bet more than half of those folks are not going to vote. So what do we need to do? We need to get out and talk about kitchen table issues. We need to talk about what things cost. And I think they're going to be right down the road in Duluth, Georgia, on Wednesday, talking about these kinds of issues. And for me, here are the three things I'm looking at. I'm looking at Peach County, which is in South Georgia, which has gotten it right every single time in the last 20 years on elections. They're a rural county, but their northern part of the county is Republican, the southern part of the county is Democrat, and they usually vote the way the rest of the state votes. The two other things I'm looking at is Cobb and Gwinnett. Cobb and Gwinnett were solidly Republican counties for years, and in the last three election cycles, they've been Democrat. I think they're probably going to stay Democrat, but what I'm looking for, are they getting more Democrat or less Democrat? And then that would tell me that some of these pie in the sky numbers about minority women deciding to vote for Trump or black men deciding to vote for Trump may not be as big as we think they are. We always hope for that, right? As Republicans, we hope for that. But it is going to be a bigger number than we've had in the past. It just depends on how much of that. And then the final thing I'm looking at is the overall early vote totals. If we're roughly at about 27% African American vote. In order for a Democrat to win Georgia, that's got to be around 30, just a little bit north of 30. Right now, Democrats are ahead of Republicans in voting and early voting, and generally more Republicans go out on election day. There's a big push to get Democrats out on election day too. So, we've got a lot of things to look at.
Georgia is really shattering records when it comes to early voting. As of now, a few hours ago, Georgia Secretary of State COO Gabriel Sterling announced on X that early and absentee voting totals are over 1.7 million, which is nearly 25% of active voters. So historically, as we know, the more early voters are Democrats opposed to Republicans. So as a Republican, does that concern you? What do you think about these numbers?
Well, but the overall number of Republican voters is up dramatically, but I think that's because we're not in COVID, because the average percentage is around 5 or 6% of absentee ballots. It went up to 33% for COVID, and then now it's back down to those averages of 6 or 7%. So I think what we're seeing is more Republicans going out to early vote. They're still being outnumbered by Democrats, but not as much. And what we're seeing is fewer absentee ballots because of two things. One, we don't have COVID, but two, people are concerned about the post office. I mean, that's kind of one of those really bad post office locations is in Palmetto, Georgia. John Ossoff, our Democratic senator, has been doing hearings about it. And so there's a real fear of putting your ballot in the mail. And so I know I delivered my father-in-law's ballot so that it wouldn't go through the mail. So I know that it got there. I put it in the drop box and it was in there. But I think I'm encouraged by the numbers of Republicans going up. It means that we are getting out and voting early because, for a period of time, President Trump was saying, don't trust voting early, don't vote early. But he's off that message. And he's actually had a really well-run campaign this time where he stayed on message a lot better.
I know that you feel that Georgia is now back to being red. University of Georgia political scientist Trey Hood, who worked on this poll, reportedly said this: "It's a really close race. Neither side has this in the bag." So between now and Election Day, as a Republican, what do you want to see Trump do to shore up that win in the Peach State?
So I went back to school in my 50s and got my master's in political science. So Trey Hood was one of my professors. So he's a brilliant data scientist, that's for sure. But what we have got to do is we got to get out the vote. And one thing we're doing better than we did the last time is something we stole from the Democrats, okay? And that is how they took your phone contacts, matched them up with possible voters, so that when you're doing those phone calls, you're actually calling people instead of just randomly calling somebody who doesn't know who your number is. So we're doing a better job at that. And I just say to folks, to forget about getting on a call list. Find 5 people that haven't gone to vote yet and make sure they get out to vote. Because whatever the outcome is, I want it to reflect Georgia. I want it to reflect the United States of America. Because tomorrow will come regardless who wins this presidential election. I want President Trump to win, but I don't think it's the end of the world if he doesn't, okay? And we've got to know and be secure in our election and make sure it's a big enough win that we don't have a question.
Well, Martha Zoller, I appreciate you coming on, breaking this down with me. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much. It was great to be with you.